Welcome to one of Africa's highest, most remote and unknown mountain ranges located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. The Rwenzori Mountains, also known as the Mountains of the Moon, are stretched over 120 kilometers long and 61 kilometers wide. Come and experience Africa's most beautiful alpine area. With every hour and every altitude gain, the landscapes, colors and views are ever-changing. This UNESCO-protected national park contains unique biodiversity and breathtaking sceneries such as the bamboo zones, mossy heather zone, numerous waterfalls, tropical rainforest, mountain lakes and eternal snow. Culminating at an altitude of 5,109 meters, the Margarita Peak is the highest point in Uganda and the third highest peak of the whole African continent after Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. This mystical and demanding mountain range is located on the foothills of Queen Elizabeth National Park, one of Africa's most popular game drives, and a few hundred kilometers from the Bwindi impenetrable forest that inhabits the endangered silverback mountain gorillas. Rwenzori Mountains offers trails for all levels of hikers, which range from 1-day to 10-day trips. The shorter trips are not as physically demanding and still showcase the amazing beauty in the art of nature, including rare vegetation, rivers, and numerous waterfalls. This unique biosphere is a true gem that needs to be preserved not only for the many endemic species it contains, but also for the local community which directly benefits and lives from the mountain's gifts. Be ready for the ultimate trekking experience. Come and discover Rwenzori, the Mountains of the Moon located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Welcome to one of Africa's highest, most remote and unknown mountain ranges located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. The Rwenzori Mountains, also known as the Mountains of the Moon, are stretched over 120 kilometers long and 61 kilometers wide. Come and experience Africa's most beautiful alpine area. With every hour and every altitude gain, the landscapes, colors and views are ever-changing. This UNESCO-protected national park contains unique biodiversity and breathtaking mossy heather zone, numerous waterfalls, tropical rainforest, mountain lakes and eternal snow. Culminating at an altitude of 5,109 meters, the Margarita Peak is the highest point in Uganda and the third highest peak of the whole African continent after Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. This mystical and demanding mountain range is located on the foothills of Queen Elizabeth National Park, one of Africa's most popular game drives, and a few hundred kilometers from the Bwindi impenetrable forest that inhabits the endangered silverback mountain gorillas. Rwenzori Mountains offers trails for all levels of hikers, which range from 1-day to 10-day trips. The shorter trips are not as physically demanding and still showcase the amazing beauty in the art of nature, including rare vegetation, rivers, and numerous waterfalls. This unique biosphere is a true gem that needs to be paid benefits and lives from the mountain's gifts. Be ready for the ultimate trekking experience. Come and discover Rwenzori, the mountains of the moon located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Welcome to one of Africa's highest, most remote and unknown mountain ranges located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. The Rwenzori Mountains, also known as the Mountains of the Moon, are stretched over 120 kilometers long and 61 kilometers wide. Welcome to one of Africa's highest, most remote and unknown mountain ranges located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. The Rwenzori Mountains, also known as the Mountains of the Moon, are stretched over 120 kilometers long and 61 kilometers wide. Come and experience Africa's most beautiful alpine area. With every hour and every altitude gain, the landscapes, colors and views are ever-changing. This UNESCO-protected national park contains unique biodiversity and breathtaking sceneries such as the bamboo zones, mossy heather zone, numerous waterfalls, tropical rainforest, mountain lakes, and eternal snow. Culminating at an altitude of 5,109 meters, the Margarita Peak is the highest point in Uganda and the third highest peak of the whole African continent after Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. This mystical and demanding mountain range is located on the foothills of Queen Elizabeth National Park, one of Africa's most popular game drives, and a few hundred kilometers from the Bwindi impenetrable forest that inhabits the endangered silverback mountain gorillas. Rwenzori Mountains offers trails for all levels of hikers, which range from 1-day to 10-day trips.
And also bless us, the listeners, to learn and also be able to ask insightful questions as we build this country. Amen.
Thank you. Sophie, thank you so much for that word of prayer, and I think we are now energized and set to begin the deliberations this afternoon. We are also online, so a lot of our other audience is following us on the different pages on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll shortly be sharing the links so that you can also take advantage of that. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome our panelists who are going to share and enlighten us on this very important topic that we're discussing on zooming in on Africa. We do have a keynote address that is going to be given to us on the topical issue of positioning of tourism on Uganda's development agenda. And to do that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Dr. Pamela Mbabazi, who is the chair of the National Planning Authority. We welcome you, madam. Thank you for coming, and I will request you to take your seat. Madam Pamela is not a stranger to the tourism industry. She's also an active participant in the tourism industry, as you will discover, and has been in the academic area for quite a bit of time, and also consulted quite a bit on the Africa Union platform. But we know her contribution strongly in the establishment of the development studies at the Mbara University, and we thank her so much for her contribution towards the academic field. She's now our chief in planning for this country and for the economic recovery of this country, and she's told us that tourism is at the center stage of all this development, and we look forward to hearing from her her thoughts on how we are positioning tourism in the economy. Thank you once again, and ladies and gentlemen, finally allow me to introduce our Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, Madame Doreen Katsime. She's our boss when it comes to the development of tourism, the public policy for tourism, and welcome her so much into this field. She has extensive experience in public service with quite a number of sectors. I think this has been her most exciting sector. And we welcome Madame Doreen Katsime for joining us. Now that they have exited these chairs, I don't know whether some members may feel free to take on these chairs as well. They are more vantage, you know. You're much more nearer to the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our panel this afternoon and evening, and we'll lead a very interesting discussion specifically on the topics relating to Africa, African tourism, how we should position ourselves in the tourism industry, how we can compete better, and they will be giving us a different perspective on how we should be developing tourism in Africa. Allow me at this point in time to invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Pamela Mbabazi, to take us through the important topic of positioning of tourism on Uganda's economic development agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director, for those very generous words of introduction. So a very good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I bring you greetings from the National Planning Authority, and in a special way, I wish to recognize and welcome our regional and international partners to the Pearl of Africa, particularly our distinguished panelists that have come from far and wide to invite you all to take time off to explore Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Allow me to congratulate the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, Uganda Tourism Board, Uganda Wildlife Authority Competitiveness and Enterprise Development Project setup, and all of you organizing this great event, which has become a key landmark of our tourism calendar. And I want to thank Uganda Tourism Board for inviting NPA and giving me the privilege to speak to you during this panel discussion on Zoom in Africa. And the topic given to me is positioning tourism on Uganda's development agenda. It's a very interesting topic, and I want to begin off by raising a few questions, which I think will pretty much summarize what my remarks are all about. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I will try to highlight what is Uganda's development agenda, and I'll try to explain a little bit, is tourism adequately captured in our development agenda? And then I'll try to see or share with you what I think are the gaps in Uganda's development agenda relating to positioning of tourism, and finally make suggestions, what suggestions I could come up with that, or what I would like to share with you that I think could firmly position tourism on Uganda's development agenda. So my remarks will really attempt to highlight those issues, but let me first reflect on the contribution of tourism to Uganda's development. Ladies and gentlemen, tourism has contributed to Uganda's development, albeit with some complexities here and there. In 2019, before COVID hit us, tourism was contributing 7.7% of Uganda's GDP, 7% of our total employment, approximately 1.5 million people along the entire tourism value chain, and US dollars 1.6 billion in foreign exchange earnings. In terms of non-tax revenue, the collections by tourism MDAs increased from Uganda shillings 61 billion in financial year 15-16 to approximately 130 billion by 2018-2019. Tourism has both backward and forward linkages with many sectors of the economy, such as agriculture, transport, hospitality, culture, arts, and crafts. It does also have positive impacts on local communities, the local economy, SMEs, for instance, restaurants, accommodation facilities, local cultural troops, to which it provides a source of income and livelihood. On the other hand, tourism may have security dimensions that may harm the economy. For instance, government communication pronouncements on controversial geopolitical issues. But what is Uganda's development agenda? Distinguished colleagues, as you may be aware, Uganda's development agenda is pronounced in our development framework, developed from within or outside, but the country subscribes to this agenda, and this is explained in a few examples, like the Vision 2040, which is operationalized through our national development plans. And you very well know that we've finished the first National Development Plan, the second National Development Plan, and we're currently implementing the third National Development Plan. We also have the NRM Manifesto, where tourism is encapsulated. We have the sector and local government plans aligned to the NDPs. And Uganda's development agenda is also influenced or aligned to the global and regional development agendas, particularly the Sustainable Development Goals, Africa Agenda 2063, but also the East African Vision 2050. So it should be noted that the transformative agenda of the SDGs is in the same spirit as our Uganda Vision 2040, which all talk to promoting tourism as a key sector. But is tourism captured in these frameworks that define Uganda's development agenda? And my answer is yes. I think we've tried to ensure that tourism is well positioned in all these frameworks that I've highlighted. And in our Vision 2040, tourism is identified as one of the opportunities to be harnessed through strengthening the fundamentals. Indeed, in Vision 2040, our targets for promoting tourism are to enable Uganda annually earn approximately $12 billion US dollars. And we can do it. We can do it. I was just having brief talks with the PS a while ago. We need to deliberately and intentionally anchor our progress as a country in ensuring that we promote tourism. Other countries have done it. If you compare and you see what, for instance, our neighbor like Kenya puts into ensuring that they anchor tourism in their development agenda, we can do it. And in our NDP3 currently being implemented, we devote a whole program, the Tourism Development Program, amongst the 20 programs we have in our NDP, as one of the avenues of ensuring that we transform our country. But the extent to which we are implementing the interventions is something we all need to interest ourselves about and find out, why hasn't this worked? What more do we need to do to ensure that we promote? So in terms of anchoring tourism in the development framework, we've done it. On paper, it is there. But what more needs to be done to ensure that we achieve what we set ourselves? In the NRM manifesto, it's also structured around 5 thematic areas, with tourism, agriculture and manufacturing, among others. But government is certainly committed to promote tourism and marketing, but that is also based on the growth of the economy itself in terms of how we can then apportion the rightful amount to promote the sector that we all agree is very central. So tourism is indeed captured in Uganda's development agenda, but probably, and I want to argue, maybe not well positioned. So where is tourism captured in Uganda's development agenda? At the macro levels, of course, there are some gaps strategically. There are also some gaps in implementation. And there are also some gaps in the operational and tactical levels. The whole element that I would want to, again, elaborate a little bit. In our midterm review, which we've just completed over NDP 3, it has been indicated that in overall 38.1% of the pledges under tourism were achieved. So that is certainly not even half of what we had set ourselves to do, and 28.6% are likely to be achieved, while 33.3% are still lagging behind. Now, some of these key pledges lagging behind include, for instance, the redevelopment of the source of the Nile as a world-class tourism attraction site. We're here trying to attract more tourists to this country. We have an amazing resource right here with us, but we have not invested enough as a country. But I'm now here, and I'm demonstrating that we've started the thought process for NDP4. We want to get it right. We want to see how we can anchor tourism as one of the key anchors of the development of Uganda. And it's you, it's us here that are really trying to challenge our thinking to see, how do we get it right? How can we ensure that every Ugandan appreciates that every dollar we put in tourism will have the highest return in getting us to move faster, and therefore influence the decisions and tourism sector, which translates to 50% of the NDP3 requirement. While in financial year 2021-22, only 161 billion was released against an approved budget of 178. That demonstrates the challenges that we have as a country. But I don't want to appear pessimistic, because there's a lot of opportunities. There's so much that we can do. Although there are still many gaps to tourism host communities, that is definitely a plus. The airport has been upgraded, and more improvements are being made. We could do better there, and we are continuing. There has been a deliberate effort to prioritize the 18 tourism roads. A number of them are in advanced stages of procurement, and these are no mean achievements. I'm trying to highlight some of the positives that have been made in terms of progress with promoting Uganda's tourism. So positioning tourism adequately in Uganda's development agenda would, among other things, require covering these some of strategic issues that I highlighted, but also looking at the implementation, operation, and tactical gaps that I mentioned. We have to agree what are those notches, what are those key areas we need to touch that are going to unlock the potential. And I think continuous and deliberate lobbying and sensitization is necessary. Why am I saying this? You may disagree with me, but lobbying is one of this. We need to get more Ugandans in positions of decision-making, appreciating that tourism is very essential. So having continuous engagements, continuous conversations, continuous engagements that will get people to appreciate is very crucial. So holding policy dialogues certainly is going to be key with key policy decision makers. And I was very pleased to learn that the ministry had a lengthy engagement with it, especially when you compare us with our players and in the region and competitors. So this is something that as a sector, as a country, we need to have honest conversations and in seeing what more needs to be done. A lot has been done, our Ginger Training School and quite a number of private sector initiatives, but we need to do it better. I think we need to do it smarter, and we need to be more deliberate and intentional. Improving road infrastructure in Kampala, I don't need to elaborate much on that one, but also harmonizing communication so that there is a clear message that goes out about how we market Uganda. The favorable tax incentives is going to be very critical, but also the monetary incentives at all levels of the value chain are very critical in ensuring that we position tourism to benefit and adequately promote our development agenda. Indeed, quite a number of concerns have been raised about not having that conducive milieu to promote the sector. So we need, and we're working with the Ministry of Finance to really ensure that the tax regime is favorable in a sense of promoting the sector. Through effective budget lobby and advocacy right, from the budget strategy to development, implementation and monitoring, I think it's going to be very, very critical that we highlight tourism promotion and approach this from a value chain perspective. Distinguished participants, I think we need to also demonstrate the contribution of tourism to Uganda's economy, including macroeconomic stability, foreign exchange earnings, employment, local livelihoods, national security to key policy and decision making. These are things you may think are obvious, but for us to move as a country together, there has to be a clarity of thinking and understanding of what is the actual contribution, for instance, of tourism to employment. And get it very clearly as compared, for instance, to agriculture, as compared to manufacturing, as compared, and ensure that we all understand what this will mean. Demonstrating the returns on investment in tourism is also crucial as a means of attracting public and private investment in the tourism sector. So holding tourism investment forums like this, targeting local and international investors is going to be very, very critical in ensuring that we also improve the infrastructure around tourism sector. Tourism is undoubtedly a low-hanging fruit with quick and high returns on investment that need to be harnessed, and we need to play the trumpet loud and clear. So ladies and gentlemen, let us harness the power of partnerships to promote tourism as well, because in government, local governments, in the private sector, development partners, culture and religious institutions, we need to act together much more than we have done. I think these partnerships will create entry points, networks, resources that will help to put tourism on top of the national development agenda and ensure that there are clear partnerships and adequate coordination mechanisms among the different state and non-state actors. I was telling the Director of Tourism that we need to have much more deliberate conversations across government in ensuring how do we support the tourism board, because I'm not sure that within government we're having that clear engagement. What is NPA beyond planning and putting in place strategic plans are we doing to support the work you're doing? And as at the ministerial level, how do we ensure that our ministers, our politicians, in whatever framework they are really talking about how to market these partnerships in the religious sector, in schools? What are schools doing in a more coordinated, collaborative manner? And these are things that we need to deliberately talk about, have a strategy and policy around, and ensure that we move. But we also need to institutionalize through our tourism subsector through, of course, strengthening budget support, like I mentioned before, ensuring training for human resources, but also institutional support. The Ministry of Tourism needs to certainly have sizable budget share for it to have an impact. Uganda Tourism Board, we need to think of ways of ensuring that the budget is increased. Uganda Wildlife Authority, Uganda Wildlife Education Center, Uganda Hotel Tourism Training. So we can't continue lamenting. We have to have critical discussions, plan effectively, ensure that we agree as a country what to prioritize to get this subsector through by touching the different notches that make up the value chain for the tourism industry, but also leveraging on Uganda's diplomatic missions abroad to promote tourism is another area. I think that when you visit many of our embassies, we could do more in terms of marketing Uganda if you compare us particularly with other countries. And this, again, needs to be very deliberate in ensuring that tourism underpins and defines our foreign relations. It has to be clearly a policy that is taken into consideration, that tourism will really be, but with a pronouncement of His Excellency, that we promote exports through tourism. I think we need to move faster, working with the key players, the Ministry Tourism Board. What does this actually mean? Do we need to place people there as tourism coordinators? What exactly does it mean? Taking tourism to local governments, culture and religious institutions through supporting them to identify, protect, and promote tourist sites is very essential. I think we need to have in a very coordinated manner, ensuring that it's not just at the national, but permeates down to local governments, to culture and religious institutions, and that we are very clear in how we are institutionalizing tourism in all these areas. But every government official, like I said, should be and should take it upon themselves to be promoting tourism. Ladies and gentlemen, I think tourism should also include, of course, a deliberate move to have more of such international conferences, but also meetings, but across the MDAs. When I look around, I don't see many people from Ministry of Water. I don't see anybody from Ministry of Defense. I don't see anybody from Ministry. It should be deliberate. We need to move together and ensure we mobilize and get us together as one government in embracing this effort. And we can do it. Other countries have done it. It's not rocket science. We all can do it if we decide. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to emphasize that for Uganda to become a competitive tourism destination, we need to first firmly position Uganda in our national development agenda, but follow this with the adequate resources, which we can plan for. We can plan for and ensure that we get it right if we prioritize our interventions well. All of us in our respective capacities have responsibility and engagements. So how do we get everybody to really buy into this? How do we get everybody to understand and appreciate this? You're the key players, you're on the ground, you know what it takes, so we are listening and we are really ready to hear what you have to say so that we can work together to ensure this happens. So on this note, I wish to pledge NPA's commitment to supporting your efforts and playing a very big catalytic role in advancing sustainable tourism and in integrating it in Uganda's development agenda. Thank you for listening to me, for God and my country.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think she deserves another clap. That was excellent, and Doctor, thank you so much. Through your presentation, we've peeped into what the framers of Uganda's economic development agenda are thinking about tourism, and the beauty is we are there. We are there. But you've also given us the door that if we want to get deeper inside, we need to engage more, lobby more, and this is what exactly we're doing. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts on what we need to do, and we pledge to continue with that agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from our main speaker. We now move on to our panelists. The approach is going to be, we're going to first of all invite them to give us very brief sneak peeks on the key topical area that we'll be interrogating a little more so that you understand their point of view and are able to raise the necessary questions when the time does come. To begin it all, I want to turn our attention to the CEO of Africa Tourism Board, Dr. Cuthbert. I will not attempt the word Nchube in the correct way. You will help us pronounce that name properly. But he's going to take us in that topical area of the global economic outlook with a view on Africa and Uganda. Doctor, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much, brother. We really appreciate. And a very good afternoon to all of us.
Good afternoon.
Taking us once again this opportunity to thank the Uganda Tourism Board to afford us as African Tourism Board. Uganda Tourism Board and African Tourism Board, there's quite a lot of good similarity. To let us come and be part of this great initiative where we celebrate our Africanism, where we celebrate our diversity, where we showcase.
That's the microphone so that they can hear.
Yes, where we showcase our uniqueness as Africa in Africa, and also acknowledging the Minister of Tourism and the government of this great nation. You are doing well. I have always wondered why our rating agencies are foreign agencies. And in most cases, they don't appreciate Africa and the endeavors we have in Africa. We need time. It's time for Africa to stand up and be able to create our own mechanisms that will talk to us and reflect our interests as Africans. Doc, you spoke about harmonization within the tourism sector. You spoke about infrastructure development. which is still a nightmare in most member states. I think we need really to accelerate. That's where we are pleading with the public sector. Let's join hands with our private sector. As our policymakers, let's drive the agenda of pushing our continent to the right. I'm always cognizant of the fact that Africa is not a standalone continent. We are part of the global community. Though our friends, they have discarded Africa. That's why in most cases, they are always referred to Africa as one of the afterthoughts. Afterthoughts. Even when we attend these international conferences, Africa is not given its position, share position within the global. Therefore, I think also it's a wake-up call. If we could go back, rewind during the times of COVID-19, where the global community closed their borders and say, Africa, let's not fly to Africa. Let's stop traveling to Africa. It was a wake-up call to say, Africa, can we come back and have discussions among us ourselves? That's why the emphasis is on our domestic, regional, and continental appreciating what we have in our disposal. I have noted that the wind is changing. If you look at the BRICS community, I'm told that we have 19 member states who are now joining the BRICS, disconnecting themselves from the European Union. That on itself is a signal that Africa is time now to reposition ourselves. It is time to take our space within the global community, and that actually prophesies the dominance of the United States dollar, that it is going to lose its shape in this beautiful continent. Yesterday, we had quite a lot of good engagements, especially within the MICE sector, where the emphasis was to collaborate, where the emphasis is to say, as Africa, what share are we getting in our MICE sector and conferences? I had a problem. When you look at most of these conglomerates conferences, we're talking of the mining Indaba. We're talking of the World Tourism Market Africa. We're talking of WTTC. Remember, these are our partners. We love them so much. But I want to challenge all stakeholders, especially within member states. Isn't it time to create these massive conferences that will engage us as stakeholders in Africa? These guys, they've realized a niche market in Africa. That's why they are bringing these massive conferences. It is time for us to rise. It is time for us to collaborate, and it's time for us to build our own empires. I am so excited and proud with East African community. We have created quite a number of engagements where they are saying, look, let us collaborate as a bloc within our community. That is really commendable. And we have been pleading with quite a number of other member states, blocs, the Western bloc, the Central bloc, to say, wow, can we also start to emulate these good practices? Yes, can we start to learn? Can you extend your hand so that we are not left behind? We need to see, yes, infrastructure developments, the convention centers. Yes, I believe Uganda, you are building a mammoth elephant. We want Africa to be engaged. The next time, most probably, we come back here, let's have a continental event so that even our member states ministers of tourism, let them come, let's engage. I allude with you to say, the Minister of Water, there's no tourism without water. Minister of Agriculture, there is no tourism without agriculture. They all fit within the mainstream of tourism. And we believe that tourism is one of the powerful tool catalysts that will bring development in our beautiful continent. And also tourism, we believe that it's one of the catalysts that joins us together as brothers and sisters. My dear friends, Africa's economic recovery has been disrupted. Yes, we all know during the 2021, most probably 2019 and so forth, by a range of internal and external shocks, including the adverse weather conditions, rising rates of inflation, higher borrowing costs, and softer demands in major export markets. That is why we are saying, as Africa, it is time for us to talk with one voice. It is time for us really to do away with this colonistic mentality that identify your brother, your sister as a South African, as a Rwandan, as a Ugandan. Let's break those borders that has divided us for so long. We are all brothers and sisters. Therefore, a need for us to work together, a need for us to drive together, a need for all these tourism boards to be speaking with one voice. I had an experience, especially when you visit WTM in London, that's where you see our segmentation as Africans. Rwanda would be sitting in his own corner there. Uganda in his own corner there. There is no cohesion. So we are saying those global audiences, it is an opportunity for us to group together, regroup together. Let's talk to one another. We want to see a situation where CEOs, they start engaging robustly to say, how do we promote our destinations holistically? How do we push our African agenda? How do we push our regional agendas so that we achieve what we want to achieve as a bloc of nations? Yes, climate change, which is one of the most devastating that has affected our agriculture. And we know that without agriculture, there is no tourism. We all love food. I love food. I love good food. So we need to make sure that what do we do as Africans to work around the climate change? So we can only achieve when we group together. At one stage during one of the climate conferences, where we have noted, especially within the SADC, you go to Zambia, you go to Durban, you see a whole lot of vehicles imported from China and some from UK and some from the United States. Those are vehicles that have reached their lifespan. What do they do now? They dump them to Africa, and they're creating a lot of chaos. So how do we address the issue of climate change when we are not working together with the very nations who say they are advanced and civilized, dumping into Africa, until we stand together as Africans and make sure that we achieve our goals? Yes, we are also saying our domestic populace, your township tourism. Remember, these are the custodians of what God has given us. Do they benefit within the tourism space? Do they have a share? Do we look at? So these are the issues we need to be able to discuss. These are the issues we need to let them appreciate. As we said during the COVID-19, we started to appreciate our domestic. We started to appreciate even our parks. This goes across other nations. We were in Equatorial Guinea, where we noted that the bulk of their GDP was now coming from the tourism sector, from the domestic, from their populace. It is because they have appreciated. Once you have an appreciation from your township, from your rural, tourism, remember, these are the brand ambassadors who will sell our destinations. So we need to be able to work together. Colleagues, the objective of this great initiative, especially the Pearl of Africa Expo, I believe it is to promote inclusive ecotourism and secure an equal opportunity and thereby increase opportunities to economic investment that has been an enabling factor towards our continental growth and also our sustainability as a sector. Adopting two new trends to make and drive our economic competitiveness, firstly in the region, expanding to the continent and beyond. I have said we applaud the East Africa community. You are doing a good job. Unfortunately, you are not going to get these compliments from our international medias. You are getting it from home because we are part of these great engagements. You are doing extremely well, and we want to encourage the other regions to be able to emulate these good standards. And I have full confidence that this is very possible with how we organize, especially the organization in Uganda and her neighbors like Rwanda, Kenya, and Tanzania. You are well organized to promote tourism across your region, respective economies and the region. This has made me always request for enhanced synergies between institutions like the East Africa Tourism Platform, who are doing an exceptional job. And our SADC tourism private sector players to have tourism propel and just fast track the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agenda 2063 of the AU. We cannot achieve these goals until we have a seamless, well-coordinated synergy across all our member states. As we are emphasizing and appreciating this driving tool, which is tourism, we need to make sure that good connectivity, we need to make sure that there is seamless exercise in terms of obtaining visa regimes. We need to do away with those. And one of the goals of the AU is to make sure that by then we would have achieved the African Union passport that will enable us to travel anywhere in our continent without hassles, without challenges, without problems. We need to support such great initiatives. Colleagues, the onus is up to us. Africa is rising. Whether they want to believe it or not, I strongly believe we are on the right track. So therefore, my plea is unity and synergy and collaboration. Let us all come together. Let us all rally behind this vehicle that will achieve so much for our economies to sustain and grow. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I think that was very good to know what perspective we have from the African continent. You've enlightened us or showed us the way that the winds of change are blowing our direction, and we need to think inward in as far as tourism development is concerned. We need to work as one, and of course there is light and hope and encouragement that the track we've taken is the right one. Ladies and gentlemen, having heard from the African perspective, we would like now to hear about Uganda itself. And the best person to take us through that, that perspective is none other than the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Tourism, Madame Doreen Katsime. She's going to give very brief remarks on Uganda as a tourism destination and what's next for the Pearl of Africa. I would like to invite you, Madam.
A very good afternoon. Good afternoon. Well, good. Can I just see by show of hands who is visiting? Those who are just visiting Uganda. You're most welcome. Thank you very much. I have already been introduced. Doreen Katusime, my name. And by the grace of God, I work as Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Tourism. Tourism, wildlife, and antiquities. I don't want to leave that out, because sometimes we focus on tourism, and yet we are in charge of all those other mandates. Now, it gives me great pleasure this afternoon to be at this seminar and to welcome, especially, and that's why I wanted to see how many of us are visiting. I welcome the Ugandans, but in a special way, I want to welcome those who have come from outside Uganda, whether within the East African region or elsewhere. Welcome to the Pearl of Africa. I am pleased to note that I think this Poate 2023, I don't know if I am right, but for the time I have been in the sector, I think it is the most well attended. Of course, we had the disruptions of COVID, we had a virtual one, we had one the other year, but this is a sign that the world is recovering. And we are very grateful to God that we are beginning to recover from COVID, and people are beginning to enjoy to travel and to associate again. So we are some of the lucky ones that made it through COVID, and finally we are here. In a special way, I welcome the East African Tourism Boards who are participating in this exposition, and reiterate the strength of regional partnerships. I think Pamela talked about it. Dr. You didn't help us to pronounce the name better. I don't want to make a mistake. Senkube? Yeah. Is that the? I don't know how to click, but so everybody has, I think, emphasized this, the need to strengthen regional partnerships in developing and promoting our destination under the theme of borderless borders. And I really want to dwell a little bit on this. Yes, sometimes we act as competitors because we're sometimes in the same business. But I think it is high time that we realized and really embraced the partnerships. Because the truth of the matter is that God gave us a lot in abundance. We are not short of the resources. So the more we work together, the more we all benefit. And so if you are promoting the destination as East Africa, we may have similarities, of course, in a lot of things, maybe the wildlife, maybe, but there are certain things that we have done better on each side. There are certain things that are unique to us and unique to our neighbors. So we ought to have this abundance mentality that it's not going to get finished, even if we market our region, as Dr. Nkube was saying, as a destination. So to all the invited guests and our visitors, members of the tourism fraternity and the media who are here, we appreciate your presence, and in particular the confidence you have shown in our country. This demonstrates our enduring appeal as a destination and signifies the market's confidence in Uganda. Now, I was invited here to share thoughts in this seminar, which is called Zooming into Africa and on Uganda as a tourism destination, and what is next for the Pearl of Africa. So the Pearl of Africa amplifies what Uganda, a land of Africa's friendliest people and scenic beauty, can offer. I think there are very few countries that are our size, the size of Uganda, where you can find such breathtaking richness and diversity with such relatively small territory. And maybe I am going to repeat what you have heard elsewhere, but I guess it does no harm to keep saying it. Uganda has about 56 indigenous communities, each with a distinct cultural heritage built over several generations. All these have a strong and rich history that has distinctly defined them throughout the years and are a great tourist attraction to the country in terms of the food, music, fashion, faith, architectural uniqueness, and that is something that sometimes we do not talk a lot about. But I have noticed it when other people come to visit. They get really fascinated about, they hear Uganda and they think all the people in Uganda are the same. And then they come here and find that we are so diverse. We have different cultures, different faiths, different, of course, dialects. So that is one thing that I thought I should talk about. Now, this diversity applies also to our wildlife, of course. Uganda has, as a country, has the big seven. That is the two, the chimpanzees and gorillas, in addition to the big five. We have interesting flora and fauna, which impels curious visitors to witness nature's show of splendor. So traveling through Uganda is therefore a magic carpet ride. Uganda is home to the world's largest number of mountain gorillas. We have over 53% of the population of the gorillas, and also 50% of Africa's bird species. Over 40% of its land mass is covered by water. I think these few days some of you have been affected by the water. The rains come in a big way, and you are quite at one of the most scenic places, right by the lake. So Uganda is home to the source of the River Nile. Pamela talked about the need for us to develop this. And by the way, maybe before I forget, Pamela, I would like to thank you very much for being here. And we are so privileged, ladies and gentlemen, that we have the person who is in charge of planning for this country. So when she's talking about the development agenda and having tourism as the anchor, it gives me a lot of hope. Now, significantly, we have the mountain Rwenzori ranges, which apart from having the best adventure challenges in the world, has snow right at the equator, which crosses the country and gives it unique climate at a highland altitude in this eco-friendly citadel. Uganda's unique scenic mountains and valleys, ancient tropical forests, pristine gorges, white sand beaches, food, culture, music, weather, charming, hospitable people have always mesmerized most visitors. And that is why I think yesterday our minister quoted in detail what the Winston Churchill and why he called it the Pearl of Africa. Before COVID-19, Uganda attracted about 1.5 million international tourists. And of course, we all know what happened in 2020. But by that time, like you heard the chairperson of NPA saying, Uganda was contributing about 7%. I mean, tourism was contributing about 7% to our GDP. It was also the highest source of foreign exchange in the country. This situation drastically changed, and international tourist arrivals dropped from 1.5 million to about 470,000 in 2020. But I'm glad to say that this situation has improved in terms of arrivals, in terms of the contribution to GDP. We have seen very good recovery, and we believe that working together as a region, we are going to have full recovery by the year 2025. Some people are putting it at 2024, but if we are lucky, we'll have recovered 2024, but maybe most realistically 2025. And again, tourism is a fragile industry, sensitive, of course, to disruptions, especially of disease, epidemics, security, even negative communication, politics, and so many other things. Uganda, and indeed the world over, has most recently had the misfortune of dealing with one or several of these disruptions. As we recover from the most consequential health crisis of our time, the environmental disaster or increased water levels, which we've had in Uganda, have now receded. So we are really on our road to recovery. Worldwide, the tourism economy is opening, and all destinations are scrambling to regain the lost market share. So the competition for visitors is high, and we need to be more innovative and aggressive to survive in this new dispensation. Indeed, successful world tourism destinations have been characterized by a strong domestic and regional markets. This is an existing market that is less prone, and we have been taught this lesson the hard way by COVID. So we need to really focus on our domestic markets and build them. I think some of our neighbors learned these lessons probably ahead of us. I think the Kenyans have done this. They learned their lesson, and they have really built the domestic markets. And I'm told that most countries that are doing well in tourism really have a strong domestic tourism market. So the advent of COVID-19 exposed the fragility of the industry to these crises, and the domestic and regional market has proved to be a reliable anchor in the face of these challenges. So the tours can be arranged at significantly lower costs, and the geographic spread of tourism benefits. And when I'm talking about domestic tourism, I'm also looking at the regional. It was exciting yesterday and the other day to hear about some of the campaigns that are being done regionally between Uganda and Kenya. We can do the same with Tanzania. We can do the same with Rwanda. We can do the same with DRC. So we need to focus as we look at the international tourists, but also let's focus a lot on building our regional and domestic markets. We also recognize the power and potential of tourism to advance prosperity and drive inclusive, sustainable development. The tourism sector touches almost every part of our economies and societies. And I think, again, Pamela was talking about this. And I think as a sector, we need really to, I don't know how we can drum this and make everyone in the country and in our regions appreciate that tourism impacts on every other sector of the economy. We saw what happened in COVID. Once the hospitality sector closed, here in Kampala, people were looking for where to throw their eggs because they had no market. So we know that it impacts heavily on agriculture. It impacts on transport and many other sectors. So we know that it is an anchor to all the other sectors. Now, the debate about the role of tourism in development has recently moved from an approach that focuses solely on the tourism sector's role in reducing poverty to a sector that promotes inclusiveness and equitable distribution of wealth. And I think, Pamela, this is the discussion that we need to have at national level, at regional level, and maybe that's when people will understand and appreciate the importance of tourism. So even before the pandemic, the industry grappled with the questions of equitable growth, as the value of tourism, of the tourism dollar, was not trickling down as expected in a fair and proportionate way. So the policy direction of government is to promote this equitability and contribute to a balanced growth of the communities. The tourism industry can only prosper if it engages the local population by contributing to social values such as participation, education, and enhanced local governance. At the same time, there can be no real tourism development if such development damages the values and culture of the host communities or even the environment, or if the socio-economic benefits generated by the tourism sector do not trickle down to the community level. So the growth and transformation of Uganda's tourism industry, and indeed the rest of Africa, will be defined by the information and digital revolution. Smart tourism has become the new buzzword to describe technological, economic, and social developments in tourism, fueled by technologies that rely on big data, new connectivity, and artificial intelligence. So the increasing consumer reliance on smart innovations is transforming the way tourism enterprises package value propositions, the way they conduct business processes, and deliver experiences. Uganda is primarily a nature-based attraction area. We are also aware of the challenges and threats to conserving the pristine resource. The threats of poaching and encroachment on the protected areas have affected the stability of our ecosystems. The effects of climate change occasioned by deforestation, pollution, invasive species, all these have threatened the resource, and by extension, they threaten the tourism attractiveness of the destination. So as we talk tourism, as we talk about driving the numbers, we have to have at the back of our mind the impacts, in other words, sustainable tourism. How do we address the needs of the tourists, the needs of the visitors, as well as the needs of the host communities, and the impact it has on the environment? So the concept of sustainable tourism focuses on the principle of economic utilization for an indefinite time scale and does not undermine the physical and human environment. So whenever you travel, always remember to respect nature, respect culture, respect the host communities, and you can be the change that you want. Finally, I would like to note that Destination Uganda is ready for investment. It offers unique attractions and has worked to improve the infrastructure and regulatory environment to attract business. We have a friendly investment climate, and so Uganda is ready for investment. There are opportunities for investment in the hospitality industry, particularly in the city, in the business and conference and hotels, as well as in the protected areas in terms of building lodges and other infrastructure. We have wide opportunities in the transport service, ranging from domestic air travel, marine transport, and the tourism transportation. There is enormous potential in product development, especially exploiting the nature-based attractions like the Lake Victoria, the islands, national parks, and mountains, among others. Uganda has an attractive framework of economic and fiscal incentives for private investors in the tourism industry. Uganda's incentive package provides generous capital recovery terms, particularly for investors whose projects entail significant investment in plant and machinery, and whose investments are likely to yield profits over longer periods. In the words of Winston Churchill again, Uganda is the pearl of Africa. It is a green garden from end to end, and the return on investment is likely to be greater in Uganda because of its regional centrality and linkage, its dynamic population, and is an anchor of stability. I also think I should add that I don't know if this is factual, but Uganda probably has the youngest population. It probably has the youngest population. I'm told we have about 70% under age of 40. Correct. So it's a very young population, it's a dynamic population, it's a growing population. So I urge you all to visit and invest in Uganda. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam PS, for telling it all. This is the Uganda that we all love, and the attributes and attractions that we do have, I think many have been well elaborated by the PS. But she has also focused on some of those key issues that we need to be dealing with, and the directional process that we need to emphasize, especially on regional and domestic tourism, on the smart tourism developments, on sustainability. Of course, she ended with a kalango on investing in Uganda. You all requested and encouraged to invest in this country. Not only the foreigners, but also the domestics. We need to invest in the tourism industry because of the great opportunities that it offers. At that point, of course, now I want to invite in the private sector. Tourism, as you all know, is private sector driven, and it is that private sector that is responsible for much of the development in the tourism industry. To help us understand that very well, I would like to invite Madam Sarah Kajingo, who is the Vice Chair of the Private Sector Foundation in Uganda and has been very much at the core of tourism development and promotion, to come and take us through the private sector competitiveness and strategies to address these shortcomings. Madam Sarah, you're most welcome to give us your quick remarks. I don't know how we're going to handle the light. I've tried, but I think you'll be fine. Sorry about that. It seems we can't solve that problem. Yeah, quickly.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Let's have help. Welcome to the Pearl of Africa, our brothers and sisters from around Africa. My name is Sarah Kajingo, CEO of Soft Power Communications and Vice Chair Lady of the Private Sector Foundation, Uganda, the apex body of the entire private sector in Uganda. You have heard many times, I don't know how many of you experienced Kampala by night last evening. Did you not find Ugandans very friendly people? Dr. Cuthbert hasn't, but we have a cultural experience this evening.
Persevere or next? Or enter.
Or enter. So we have, like you've heard several times, we have a fantastic destination of the friendliest, most hospitable people in the world. And expatriates have voted us for years on end as the best country to bring up a family. So you've heard from our distinguished permanent secretary, Dr. Mbabazi and Dr. Cuthbert, that Africa is very rich. And so Uganda is just one of the other African countries with a diverse and authentic heritage. You can see, when you visit Uganda, visitors come in here to do gorilla trekking, but end up doing chimps, they do culture, they do wildlife. You see over there the unique Ik culture. The Ik are an indigenous group in the northeastern country. We have rich cultures in the central Uganda. You'd do a royal mile, a rich cultural history of the kingdom, so that you see for yourself how Ugandan communities were organized. We still are very conservative. We uphold our culture, but it's always very enriching to visit Zimbabwe, visit Zambia, visit South Africa, and we can pick words. We can actually hear and understand many of the words. So Uganda is, like you have heard, we have over 50% of the world's chimpanzees, and we therefore pride ourselves as the primate capital of the world. Like you may have seen last night, Uganda, Kampala does not go to sleep. And so Kampala is the entertainment capital of East Africa, the city that doesn't go to sleep. Our weather, just as you've experienced, needs no air conditioning. Agrotourism is growing. Our tour operators are packaging, coffee tourism, rich farm experiences, but there are also opportunities in dark tourism. In the 1970s, Uganda experienced one of the darkest periods of human history. We lost hundreds of thousands of people during Amin, to the extent that when you travel, some of our major tourism source markets in the West, people remember us for Amin. So our tour operators have begun packaging Amin tours to see where this happened. Of course, we have overcome it. So there are opportunities in museums, in tour packages, these Amin tours. So I was invited here today by Uganda Tourism Board to speak about the competitiveness of the private sector. We couldn't have achieved much without the conducive investment environment backed by Ugandan government, backed by progressive Ugandan laws, quality assurance, dedicated government tourism agencies, Uganda Tourism Board, Uganda Wildlife Authority, tax incentives. If you are importing a tourist vehicle, there is a tax incentive on that. There is no tax on importation of hotel equipment, cutlery, bed sheets, and all the equipment. Sometimes Ugandan government, through the Uganda Wildlife Authority, offers discounted gorilla and complementary chimpanzee permits. They are also building centers of excellency around Uganda, and this is just to ensure that our staff in the tourism sector is skilled, so that we stop over-reliance on imported manpower. So the Ugandan private sector, the Ugandan staff engaged in tourism have a good command of the business language, which is the language that is used by our major source markets. You find the reservation managers, tour farm managers, very, very well schooled in the business language. Of course, I would be amiss if I left this podium without mentioning that Uganda has enjoyed uninterrupted stability and security for more than 30 years. Uganda had never been like this before, but we pride ourselves as a country that also contributes to the stability of the region. To ensure that Uganda's private sector is competitive, the government of the Republic of Uganda backs us with MDRs. Through Uganda Tourism Board, they support marketing. Then we have, as a private sector foundation, we through SEDEP, provide financing through matching grants to the private sector. We, of course, have several commercial banks which provide financing for anybody who would like to set up a safari lodge or elsewhere. But from the private sector perspective, we are also rooting for patient capital, because you know how much you have to shoulder to build these value chains, to build a safari lodge. So we are engaging financial institutions, and it would be great for our African colleagues to pick that. We are also formed and structured around progressive trade associations. The Uganda Tourism Association, the Uganda Hoteliers Association, and the Association of Uganda Tour Operators, and we have an opportunity to shape the policies of the Republic of Uganda on tourism. Shortcomings and mitigations. Before I go to that, Dr. Cuthbert spoke about leveraging our connectivity, leveraging our Africanness. In the last 1 year, Uganda's diplomacy is increasingly being informed by business. And so we have trade representatives, tourism attachés in our embassies, and we have had the opportunity to have a very progressive leader. And so he's leveraging bilateral relations created over the years with fellow African countries and around the world, and which we feed into to build business linkages. So we have had a recent business summit in South Africa, in Democratic Republic of Congo, in South Sudan, and elsewhere in the world. But particularly in Africa, the intention is that we have business executives, we have government actors in the same room and create a meeting of minds towards resolving the bottlenecks we face. So, as you all know, one of the shortcomings to the tourism sector is that whenever there is a pandemic, we are the hardest hit. Fortunately, Uganda has built resilient health systems. We are renowned in Africa, renowned around the world for limiting the spread of epidemics. We are actually consulted, our scientists are consulted on limiting epidemics. So we managed to limit the spread of COVID, of Ebola. Actually, Ebola has since been eliminated. We are free from those epidemics. But it's about time to think as Africans and as a global tourism sector. Should we wait for us to act when the epidemic arrives? Isn't it about time to think early detection mechanisms? Isn't it about time to devise means to future-proof tourism businesses and cushion them against unforeseen disruptions? There are still improvements that could be made in infrastructure. There are opportunities in rescue and medical air evacuation, but we are rooting for patient capital, and we also say that yes, Africa faces challenges, but there are so many spokesmen for doom and gloom. So many spokesmen for doom and gloom. Tourism presents us an opportunity to package and position Africa, position our destinations as very good destinations. We have internet and its proliferation is growing. Use that phone to take a picture of the beautiful sunset and use these platforms to sell Africa in a manner that our partners, the people we seek to collaborate with around around the world know that we are coming to the table as partners. And you know, they are socially conscious investors around the world. When they see these things, they simply take a step back. So on this note, I would like to thank you, Uganda Tourism Board, for inviting us, but also just to say that you here engaged in business who own a tourism firm, please build a digital brand. It's not enough to have a presence online. You must build it end to end, have somebody at the back end who is reading that you're not seeing, or even whether the following you're building online is actually interested in your tourism products. I thank you very much, and I wish you a very happy stay in Uganda. Thank you.
Wow, that is the voice of the private sector. And Sarah, thank you so much for shedding light on the perspectives of the private sector, the challenges they're receiving in being more competitive. You ended it well, saying some people really find it either amusing to paint a gloomy picture of Africa. Africa full of war, Africa full of disease, full of hunger. I think we need to take advantage of tourism, the digital resources we have, to paint a brighter picture for Africa, and also, tell people that we are out there to do business on an equal footing, and we are ready to receive them, not them to take the perspective that we are a place full of hunger, disease, and war. Someone defined tourism as the travel economy. It's all about travel. Once you move from place A to B, then you engage in some level of tourism. Our next presenter, Dr. Manyara, is going to highlight a little bit about the continental travel connectivity and accessibility. Yeah, we've had it all that to move from Nigeria to Morocco, at times you need to go to Europe. CEO is here. She went to Europe in order to go to Morocco. These are not very good things. Dr. Manyara, come and tell us why and how best we can overcome this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I was looking for that of saying good afternoon in Luganda or Kinyankole, but I could not come up with a word. But yeah. Anyway, I hope you're not too tired, but I won't take much of your time. I think my task was very, very straightforward, talking about these issues to do with connectivity in Africa. Madam PS, first of all, let me thank you and UTB for the hospitality. We were last year in February launching the tourism satellite accounts, so I'm beginning to get used to the Ugandan hospitality. And I think it's the binyewa, the matoke. I think you talked about unique food. This is what we always look forward to when you come to Uganda. And most importantly, the street chicken. Yes. I think, Nkube, you need to taste that chicken, eh? Yes. A friend of mine ate 5 of them, not one go. Anyway, talking about African connectivity, just to start by saying a sad story, that Africa is the least connected continent in the world. Least connected. And it is a very sad story. And before maybe I get into this, I need to give you a story. Talking about COVID, I think we're all affected by COVID. So I remember it was in March 2020. I was traveling from Djibouti, got to Kenya, and we were not so sure what was going to happen, and my bosses told me, you need to come back to work. Unfortunately, we got locked down for 7 months. And Rwanda was a total lockdown. There was no joke, eh? But in the midst of all that, I was asked to do an analysis on what I thought the impacts of COVID would be on the aviation and the tourism sector. And as I was looking at various sources of information, looking at everything, it turned out that when you look at the air transport market, that Africa only accounts for 2.1%. So 98% of the passenger air transport goes to the rest of the world and not to Africa. And not even to talk about cargo, the cargo transport market at only 1.8%. I don't know what, it's a sad story. But this turned out to, the conclusions I drew were very accidental, because I was like, okay, fine, granted. If we are not connected with the rest of the world, then chances are that the continent is not going to be affected significantly by the COVID pandemic. And indeed, that's what happened. If you look at the African continent and look at the incidence of COVID compared with the rest of the world, the most connected parts of the world were the ones that were heavily and significantly affected. If you look at the share of air transport market for Europe, for example, which is about 30%, look at the cases of COVID in Europe. Look at the cases of COVID in the Asian Pacific. Look at the cases of COVID in the North America, for example. These are heavily connected countries. But the pandemic is over. Still, our share of the air transport market remains at 2.1%. We've still not grown. And I think this is something that we need to address from events such as this as we're here. One of the things that is very clear is that the more connected you are, the more chances are that you're going to be receiving a lot of tourists. As we've seen in the case of the African continent, the most connected countries in the African continent, talk about the example of South Africa, Egypt, tend to be also the countries that are actually receiving the bulk of the tourists in Africa. And when we look at this, what we're trying to say is that for our destinations to develop, we must talk about connectivity. We must look at ways of enhancing connectivity to our destinations. One of the things that we also must talk about, and I hope the airlines represented here, is that I've said this and I'll continue to say this, is that African carriers have a moral responsibility to promote African integration. Why am I saying this? Travel within Africa is the most expensive in the whole world. And this has got to do nothing with the taxes imposed by member states and so forth. We have seen cases whereby one carrier drops out, and then when you have a monopoly, what do the carriers do? They triple the prices. So you cannot blame governments about this. I think we must have an honest discussion with African carriers. They should not be the ones to hinder connectivity, but rather should be seen as the ones to promote African integration. And I think they're going to be the biggest beneficiaries anyway, because if passenger numbers in Africa increase, then the volume of business will also increase. But again, we must talk about visa regimes. A study done by UNCTAD in 2016, talking about tourism in Africa. At that time in 2016, Africans required 55% of Africans required visa before travel within the African continent. Yet we do know that for our brothers and sisters from the African continent, they can freely travel within the African continent. So we made it easier for people from outside Africa to travel in our continent, but made it very difficult for ourselves to travel within the African continent. One of the things that we've seen, there's been some improvement, and as of last year, 47% of Africans required visa before travel within the African continent. So there's slight improvement. But in the same breath, we're seeing the introduction of e-visas across the African continent with African member states. And we're seeing that a number of countries now adopting the visa-free regimes. And I think this has gone up to about 30% of African member states. Now for Africans to travel within those countries, you don't need visas. I think we can commend countries like Rwanda that actually started this. They said, visa-free for all Africans. and we've seen a number of countries adopting this in East Africa. I don't know if Uganda is one of them. I do know Kenya is one of them. Benin, for example, has also moved towards that direction. So the more and more we see countries adopting these visa-free regimes, I think this is going to enhance connectivity, then because they'll be able to travel within the African continent without problems. But as we talk about this, let me also talk about, I don't know how many of you have heard about the African Continental Free Trade Area. You can raise your hand up. Oh my goodness, yes. So there's a challenge there. The AfCFTA is supposed to make enhanced trade within Africans, because trade within Africa is only about 16%, which means that we don't trade with each other, we trade with the rest of the world. And this is a shame, really, because there are plenty of opportunities for trade amongst East Africans. And one of the things that the CFTA has got the Free Movement Protocol, which basically means that it's trying to enhance the free movement of Africans, the right of movement and establishment, which means we can move within the African continent, establish businesses, live there, and so forth and so forth. But of course, its implementation has not been very good. But as I say this, I'm reminded that I need to remind you that within the CFTA, tourism is one of the 5 services priority sectors, which means that it's something that has been prioritized, and we need to see more and more Africans traveling within the African continent, trading from a tourism perspective within the African continent, and so forth and so forth. But as I say this, I need to maybe say something about tourism. Now, if you look at the leading tourism destinations of the world, let me just maybe make it a bit more interactive. Which is the leading tourist destination in the world as of last year? Show of hands, just like. Sorry? Yes?
France, China?
France or China? Are you sure? You need to be.
I'm guessing.
Yes, France. How many visitors do they receive? 16. 16 million? Yes?
I'd say it's much higher. 45, 50.
45. As of 2019, they're receiving about 89 million visitors. Yes. Yeah, I think even now the numbers are going to, I don't know the latest, but 2019 figures were close to 87, 89 million. How many visitors does the pre-COVID, let's talk about pre-COVID. How many visitors did the African continent receive?
Sorry, I know this already. It's 70 million people out of 1.5 billion
Yeah.
travelers globally.
Yeah, 73 million.
Which is works out to about 5%.
Yes.
It ties to what you mentioned about the 2% flights.
Exactly. And do you know why France receives about 89, 87 million people? Where do most of their visitors come from? Exactly, regional tourism. To become a successful destination, you must start developing your domestic and regional markets. That's the only way we can do it, to get to those numbers. And I was going to ask, I mean, we can have a debate about this. What do 89 million visitors do in France? Do they have lions? Do they have gorillas? I don't know. You need to think about this. I think this is the future of tourism in Africa has got to change. Yeah? Yes, what do they have? Yes, what do you do when you go to France? I don't know, you know. Yes. Yes, anyway, I'll leave that to you. But the reason I'm bringing this issue of France up is when you look at France and you look at its leading tourist markets, its leading tourist markets also tend to be its leading trading partners. So there is a correlation between what? Tourism and trade. Yeah? So, which prompted us to look at this further. We needed to understand the relationship between the two. Which leads to the other? Does tourism lead to trade, or does trade lead to tourism? And can the same apply in Africa? So we did a study on tourism and trade in Africa, and the results indicated that for us to grow trade in Africa, we must promote tourism. So it's an empirical study. So I'm challenging Madam Pierce and all the tourism ministers to take this up. We need to change the tourism narrative in Africa, that if we want to achieve the goals of the continental free trade area, we must prioritize the tourism sector. We must start marketing tourism in Africa. That's the only way we're going to realize the goals of tourism in Africa. Which brings me then to talk about the single African air transport market. Anybody heard about this? Just one person. Now, the single African air transport markets, the acronym is SATAM, is the main goal is really to make Africa a domestic air transport market, which means that all the taxes are removed, which means that you have the bulk of the freedoms of air. I don't know if you understand the freedoms of air. Yeah. Basically, the freedoms of air are there to protect or to promote domestic aviation sectors and so forth. And the highest freedom of air you have, I think, is the fifth freedom, which means that you can fly to one country, pick passengers up, take those passengers, drop them in another country, and so forth and so forth. And so once this single African air transport market is implemented, I think 34 countries have already signed it up, but unfortunately its implementation is still very slow. Once this is signed up, we hope to see connectivity enhanced. We hope to see the cost of travel, air transport, going down significantly and so forth. But unfortunately, I'm not so sure there's a big reluctance to fully implement the single air transport market. In fact, a study that was done recently showed that if just 12 countries in Africa fully implemented the single air transport market, 155,000 jobs will be created, and an additional about 1.3 billion USD of additional GDP. So it's difficult to see why there isn't really the willingness to really implement some of these wonderful initiatives that we have in Africa. But as I say that, let me also talk about the Program for Infrastructure Development for Africa, PIDA. Anybody heard of this? Sorry? Yeah, I think we have a problem, you know, Madam Pierce, we need to be talking about a lot of these initiatives significantly. But these are very wonderful initiatives. The PIDA has got elements to do with energy, transport, ICT, and transboundary water resources. And basically what it seeks to do is to connect Africa, not just through the airports, not just through the seaports, but looking at the railways, the roads, road infrastructure, and so forth. And there are wonderful initiatives already happening. I think in West Africa, they have the highway that connects the West African countries. We're already seeing that there's supposed to be a Cape to Cairo transport corridor. We have the Northern Transport Corridor. So there are a number of initiatives. And what will this do? And I think one of the reasons that Europe is one of the leading destinations in the world is because it's heavily connected. You have several options. You can travel by road, you can travel by rail, you can travel by air. And so once you have those options, then it gives you, it makes it easier to decide on what to do. And let me give you an example. I'm told that a lot of Ugandans are going to Kenya now, Madam Pierce. I hope you're receiving also a number of Kenyans coming to Uganda. And I'm told they go by road to Nairobi, and when we get to Nairobi, they take the train to Mombasa. So you can see people already beginning to have various options in terms of how to travel within the African continent, which I think is a very good thing. I think, Chair, Director of Tourism, I think I would like to thank you very much, and I hope I've shared in a nutshell. I could have talked about this for 3 hours, but I think because of time, I would like to stop there and like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Great. That was great. And it shed light on why we're not connecting. Maybe we should be discussing how we should connect after having understood why we're not connecting. I want to announce, first of all, that there's coffee outside there. The way we're going to do it is if you feel you need a cup of coffee, quietly move out, pick the cup of coffee, and we'll be able to be fine. Secondly, that we want to close this in maybe, let's give it another 40 minutes or 30, so that we're able to arrange for a trip to Ndere. We probably need to reduce on the time, but you haven't had an opportunity to raise a few questions. So we are going to limit the number of questions for the panel, just to allow us to progress to another exciting program later this evening. As we consider that, I'm just going to pose questions for each of our panelists, then invite you to supplement these questions very briefly so that we can have that interaction moving forward. I will begin with, and I will raise them all at once so that when the time to respond comes, we'll give them opportunity to do so. But moving on to Dr. Pamela, I think we're still operating in silos. You know, when the tourism sector would like to develop, for instance, the gorilla tourism, we have problems with roads, and roads are not part of tourism. So that connection, to make sure that the Ministry of Works bids the attention of tourism and works on those roads or prioritizes those roads that we need, is something that we need to seriously look into. If the banks are not understanding that they need to give us affordable resources, affordable capital, then it becomes a problem for investment in terms of cost of doing business. So how do we break these silos and work as one in this narrative of getting the tourism sector moving? Dr. Manyara, you've expounded a lot on travel connectivity, and I hope that you will also be able to shed some light on the network itself. We should be able to call across Africa at a cheaper rate. We should be able to use the internet resources we have. But there are also opportunities that are coming, all that should come out of this issue of the limited connectivity that we have. And I think Ethiopian Airways has taken good advantage in being the largest travel operator on the African continent. Why are we still building small airlines? Each one has its own airline. Can't we have one in terms of that? And maybe also on the issue of travel facilitation, on working with the visa arrangements, what exactly is the problem that we are dealing with? Dr. Cuthbert, I still fail to pronounce Nkube the way you want to pronounce it. But definitely travel within Africa is low, as you noted, and travel to Africa is very low. Yes, we've sung that song, but we need to see a way of bringing it up. How do we get more people to move within Africa? Yeah, we need to promote tourism within Africa. We've appreciated why and why we need to do it, but how do we do it? Would like to share a few of your thoughts on that. Sarah, I want to come to you on the issue of the private sector. We need to broaden investment, investors in the private sector. We need these people from Chikuvo to come and build lodges, to build the good hotels. They have a bit of that money. You need to help us bring those who have the resources to invest within the sector and getting it up. But also, how do we build on these regional partnerships? How do we get investors from Kenya, from Tanzania, from Rwanda, Sudan, and the rest to build on this? Madam PS, I will raise the issue on diversification of our resources. Yes, culture and sports have proved to be generating more visitors than the wildlife that we've heavily invested in. But comparatively, we haven't invested an equal share in developing those sectors or sections of the economy. Those of you who recall the Nyege Nyege, those who recall the Rwenzori Marathon, The Kabaka's birthday marathon is the biggest marathon on the African continent. But we don't put any money there. Are we misaligning? Dr. Manyara talked of changing the narrative. What are we doing in making this possible? I will invite a few questions. I'll begin with you. I think you're loud enough. We have limited time.
Yeah, thank you. Mine is the question about both the PS and Dr. Pamela. Don't you think we need some integration when we are capturing the data capture as regards the ministry towards the sector? In this respect, as you enter the airport, they will say destination. And the reason you are entering the country is either you are going for, thank you, you are going.
You are doing well.
You are going for tourism. But there are other things which are underrated. Take an example, the political heavyweights for those, the big officers from outside, they are coming to this country. Are they not coming to tour, even if they are coming for security reasons or defense end programs? Take an example like sports. Sports, there are very many sportsmen who come to this country. But this money, or the reasons they come as they enter the airport, is sports. But the data capture is reading differently. Take the religious issues, like those people who come to Namugongo. I think that one is catered mostly. But health issues, as the private sector lady pronounced, they are not catered under tourism. They are catered under a different ministry. On this note, I would request if there could be harmonized and then the data capture in this respect.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And very briefly, please.
Thank you so much.
You are loud enough, please.
Mine is about zooming in Africa by that hard name, by Doctor. I would like first of all to appreciate our President Museveni. He really appreciates tourism and recently gave very good directives to this country and everyone is in tourism. I hope when they're implemented, we are on the good course. But what I was wondering, we have artificial boundaries within Africa. And these artificial boundaries have different leaders who are holding on to them, that even what we are fighting with were not placed here by us. The divisions in Africa were set by someone else who is no longer here. Can we have a way we are working against these things and to say that we move forward without the artificial boundaries? Do you think African Union is doing enough to make sure that there is at least thinness of those artificial boundaries?
Thank you.
The second one, we still have an Africa that's divided against languages, Anglophone and Francophone. This is the first event I'm attending here and we don't have French translators. Maybe just because we didn't invite our brothers from the Congo. But if there was an AEC conference, we should be having some here. What are we doing towards that to say that at least there is minimal interruption of language barrier, even fact being that in Uganda, we are around 53 tribes with different languages. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, your neighbor. I'll take in two more and we'll close it from there.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Mine is not a question. Mine is just a comment. My name is Tony Okachukwu. I'm the founder of Work for Love Africa, an organization tasked with promoting intra-African air connectivity and tourism, an NGO, of course. But my comment is to piggyback on what the doctor has said on some of the concerns around air connectivity. So it is worthy to know that the airlines themselves do not start business just to hike the fares or be very competitive. Some of the issues that airlines have with connectivity on the continent is rather skewed towards government policies. Right. If some of us that fly are privy to checking the segments of each ticket that we buy, of course, most of us don't look at it, we'll find out that taxes actually contribute to the high volume of the amount you pay for a ticket. Okay, so most government agencies in different countries multitask these airlines, and then they have to kind of pass the buck to the passenger because airlines have to stay afloat, if not they'll go out of business. So basically, most times, it is the government that put these multiple taxes on airlines, which burden them with the issue of trying to stay afloat, and then they have an issue. Of course, you know most airlines on the continent, only Ethiopian Airways is profitable. Every other airline on this continent, as we speak right now, is not profitable, be it whether a domestic airline or a regional airline. Ooh. Okay, having said that, the SATAM issue also is worthy to note that it is the protectionism of countries that is preventing the implementation. Okay, a country that thinks that I can't open up my borders because the big hawks will come and take, what we have from us because we have open borders. But they fail to realize that every country on the continent has something that is unique to them, okay, which makes us very unique as a continent. So SATAM needs to be implemented to help us. But again, I've been in many fora where we talk about the profits of SATAM, the benefits of SATAM. It's becoming like a recurring symbol, being spoken at very fora, but we fail to just move the inch towards implementing some of these things that will make us to move forward. I mean, SATAM started with Yamoussoukro Agreement over 30 years ago. Now, some few years ago, just changed the name to Single Africa Air Travel Market. It's just a nomenclature, changed the name, but the issue has been around for over 30 years. And we have still not moved the inch to see how we can make sure that this thing limiting intra-Africa travel is being broken down. I don't want to bore us with some comment, but let me end with this one. So again, the doctor was asking about airlines. I don't know if there's anybody from Uganda Airlines. Now, let's bring it local. Is in this room. Please, by show of hand, anybody representing Uganda Airlines? They're not in the room. So if we're talking about air connectivity, who are we talking to? Okay? So there is a great fragmentation between the tourism boards and the airlines to have some kind of synergy to promote, to drive air connectivity to their destinations. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll take one from there, and we'll close it with the lady just over there. Be as brief as possible. Aren't you loud enough? Okay. All right, please.
Thank you very much. First, let me start by thanking the panel for great insights. Professor Mbabazi, Dr. Ngube, Madame Kagingo, and Madame P.S., as well as Dr. Manyora. Now, I have just 3 questions. The first one is for Dr. Manyara, sorry. I mean, just listening to you and the things that you pointed out, just show us. Maybe this goes now to Madame P.S., maybe this goes to the minister, maybe this is the homework for Professor Mbabazi, but the points you made just showed us how, A, disconnected we are, how under-informed we are, and so on. Now, having said that, how are we going to solve these problems if we don't have the knowledge? It's all freely available, but it hasn't filtered to us ordinary people. That's homework for you, Dr. Mbabazi. But just to pick on the point that I think this was Sarah, who went to the party last night, and it ties to Dr. Manyara's point that people who go to Paris don't necessarily go there to see tigers and zebras and so on and so on. You won't find those, I mean, unless you go to the zoo. So there are other things. The same applies for Uganda or any other country on the continent, that it's not just about the animals. We can use that as a starting point, but surely we can dovetail on that and build something even bigger. Back to your point, Madame Kagingo, as an example with yesterday, that, for instance, we all know that Kampala is the capital of nightlife, but it's not marketed as such. We never hear about tea farms, coffee plantations, all those kinds of things. So these are all kind of missing links and low-hanging fruits, but nothing is being done about it. Now, for you, I don't know, for Dr. Manyara or for you, Madam Kagingo, how do we turn the script around? How do we amplify the areas that are there already that just need to be captured? Then, Dr. Ncube, the points you made about ratings agencies being foreign, I think it talks to the absence of Africans on global stages. I don't know, maybe you want to expand a little bit about that, but as we look forward, how do we turn the situation around? How do we fix it? Then, very lastly, pledges. Okay, I think this is for you, Professor Mbabazi. You pointed out about pledges, that pledges have been made, so many missing links, marketing, budget, and so on. The question, maybe as we introspect a little bit, why is this happening? Because we've diagnosed the problem, we know where the problems are, yet we are still finding ourselves in this situation. Why is this still happening? What can we do? How can we do it differently? Thank you.
Thank you, my friend director, for allowing me by default. I would like to thank all the panelists. I think they've shared with us very insightful remarks. But again, I would want to, Director, if you allow, to emphasize an action point on collaboration. I'm in charge of the East African tourism agenda. Actually, in partnership with GIZ and the East African community, we have launched an e-catalog thanks to the contributions from Uganda. All the 7 East African community countries, what are the products for everyone who is thinking about investing or visiting East Africa? We have all the products, the database of public and private sector players into that, just as an announcement to make. Next, for UTB, this has been really a wonderful platform for this year, and we commend on your really achievement. We have been talking about regional events as one of the platforms to really make us all bring together the regional tourism agenda. And yesterday when I had the opportunity to speak at the MICE panel, I emphasized on the other positive side in tourism of co-opetition. I gave examples of events we have hosted in Rwanda, and they will never come back to Rwanda in the next 10 years. Why not share the recipe of bidding with Ugandans? So that's the kind of synergy we need. And indeed, regarding other private but everyone who lands here should be by default present and supportive to such initiatives. So those are the few remarks. Congratulations. We look forward for better and stronger, even bigger Poate. There is Magic Kenya in Uganda. There is Kili Fair in Tanzania. There is Rwanda Tourism Week. And by the way, I take this opportunity to invite you. We are looking at creating a global African village at UTTC Rwanda. Thank you. It's the first time it's coming to Africa. That's why I wanted to make this announcement. The WTTC is a bigger event of which we want Africa to position our strength. And really that the entire world sees the potential we have in tourism investments. Thank you. As well tourism attraction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I won't miss the lady over there to give us her last question, and then we'll revert to the panel.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Audrey Kruger from South Africa, and I want to also honor all the panelists. It was very insightful. And when we talk about tourism, it's the first thing that comes to mind, so much to do, so little time. But I want to direct my question to my fellow South African, Dr. Ncube. In about 2021, there was talks about creating sub-regions, to establish sub-regions in Africa, to be able to create from there the African Union that will unite Africa as a whole. I was just wondering if that talks are still on the table if people are still talking about that? Is it a possibility in the future, or do we have too many things to do on local level to level up our tourism products? Thank you.
Thank you once again. Members will have to close it at that and revert back to our distinguished panel. We would like to invite them to respond to these questions in the sequence in which they are seated. As they respond to the questions, they could also give us their parting shots very briefly so that we catch up with the time. I did explain that we have an exciting opportunity later in the evening. Dr. Pamela, we'll begin with you.
Well, thank you very much. I think the questions were all spot on, and I start with yours, Director. How do we break the silo? Certainly, you very well know that the program approach that we've adopted in the NDP3 was specifically to address the silo way of working of government. Have we done that? I don't think so. Can we do it? Yes, we can. We need to work deliberately and intentionally to make sure that we, for instance, in this conversation, we could do more next time. As the convening institution, as the planning authority, I think working collaboratively together to ensure that all ministries, departments, and agencies are in this conversation, I think is something we must deliberately do. Going forwards, especially in budget allocation, and it touches to the question that was asked, why do we continue to be the way we are, the brilliant gentleman across on that table? It's because the prioritization is different. The priorities of government right now, and we have to agree that we live in a volatile region, and therefore security has to be number one. Of course, we are trying to fast-track oil. We have to deal with infrastructure. Our economy has not been growing as it should be, and therefore, when you apportion the budget inevitably, the appreciation of tourism as a key and very low-hanging fruit is not yet there. And that's why in my remarks I mentioned, again, we need to deliberately lobby, educate, sensitize, and get everybody to appreciate that. That's what will allocate more funding to the sector. Data integration, I can't agree with you more. Data, data, data on this continent is why, even at the Planning Authority, at times we gamble as opposed to doing it right, because the data is not there. So yes, integration is important. Artificial boundaries, certainly. This is a conversation that's been since the test of time, but I think there is increasing appreciation, and the regional blocks and trying to build regional blocks is an attempt. And of course, the African integration is a process as well in trying to see that we need to redefine. But I agree with you, we cannot continue the way we've been. We have to deliberately find mechanisms of breaking the barriers that are failing to bring us together. I thank you.
Thank you so much. Africa's economic growth for 2023, we are looking at 3.6% growth. And if you look at countries like Kenya, like Ghana, Senegal, Rwanda next door, and if statistics could be followed, even Uganda, there is a progressive in terms of growth and recovery. Yes, AU, we need to give credit to our organization. They have done extremely well, and they are doing all what they can to see how best can all member states work in synergy. You have mentioned that France, why France is one of the highest contributors, especially in terms of traffic flow in tourism. It is because they've appreciated their domestic tourism. Europe, it's not that Africans are going to Europe, but it's their domestic populace who are supporting. So if Africa, we could be united and start appreciating what we have now, breaking this divide that has separated us. Yesterday, we are so glad. Our colleagues, the first day they were not talking to one another. But when they were grouped in a bus, they realized a need of connecting. So therefore, Africa, we need to start connecting to one another and appreciate the vast opportunities that we have in our disposal. The honors is up to us. It is so sad, Program Director, that yes, politically we are liberated, but economically we are still enslaved. Those enslavement is from our own making. It is high time for us to talk together. We have, made quite massive strides, as the African Tourism Board, where we bring these policymakers together, where we challenge them, issues of connectivity. How do we really move from this obstacle that is hindering the success of our tourism sector? Yes, we are doing well, and I believe that in the next 10 years, I was actually sharing with Doctor, that we are going to have a situation where we really sit and applaud and appreciate the successes that would have been actually achieved in our regions and also beyond our regions in the whole continent of Africa. Let's come together. 2024, we want to see a convergence of all the ministers to come and celebrate with us, to come and experience this beauty, the Pearl of Africa. During this year, we have the Tourism Week, in Rwanda. Let us all converge there. Let's sell our destinations. Let's tell our stories. Yes, WTTC, they are coming to Africa. Let's demonstrate that we are made out of steel. We are made out of gold. We are Africans, so that we start pollinating, we start learning from one another. Tourism, let us use it as a catalyst, as a tool that needs to bring us together as a nation, as brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you. Why is Uganda not branding itself as the entertainment capital of East Africa? I think we are all waking up. There has never been a better time than to be an African today. We have digital platforms. We should tell our stories. Storytelling is very, very key in driving tourism. We must deliberately and be intentional about investment in branding. When you go to Dubai, it is simply branding, the perception they build around the world. When I'm in Dubai and it's very, very hot, unbearably hot, I miss Uganda, but everybody's dashing to Dubai. These are lessons we could pick on building synergies. As I said earlier, Uganda is at the forefront of this. We are integrating markets, government in partnership with the private sector. We have been to several countries around Africa. Right now, Uganda Airlines flies 4 times to Kinshasa. Initially, we would have to fly to Goma, or sometimes to Bunia, then Goma, Butembo, Beni, back to Goma, and then Kinshasa. You are in transit about 3 to 4 times crossing to a country that's neighboring you. Uganda Airlines flies to Juba, it flies to South Africa, and en route South Africa, Ugandans are visiting our products, accessing the South African market, and vice versa. On the Ugandan businessmen investing in safari lodges, in building tourism products, the Ugandan private sector is very agile. We at Private Sector Foundation have, for example, been in existence since 1995, and we are structured in a way that we represent every sector in business: manufacturing, agriculture and agro-processing, professional services, which I represent, tourism, So businessmen in these sectors, oil and gas, skills, ICT, are talking. And because of the deliberate domestic tourism campaigns that the Uganda Tourism Board has been running around the country ever since the pandemic ended, many businessmen downtown, and we are honored to have the Kampala City Traders Association as our members, are talking with the tourism private sector on what they can do. So the future is very, very bright. We are also lucky that there is abundance of commitment from government. Recently, during his quarterly address to the country, His Excellency the President issued 5 directives on growth of exports of Uganda. Tourism was top of the agenda. We launched private sector foundation in partnership with government agencies, launched for the first time a trade frontier fund that will help exporters underwrite invoices. Initially, it would be difficult for, say, a Ugandan to build a value chain all the way from production to exports alone. Many people were unable to meet contractual obligations, but this fund is very welcome, and you can see the lesson to pick for the rest of the African countries is that we should be deliberate about this. That fund now is not only going to support agriculture, coffee, and those sectors, tourism is going to benefit. The other one is that, like Dr. Cuthbert said, we have been very deliberate about building bilateral relations with African countries. Uganda, for example, is the #1 host of refugees in Africa. Everybody is welcome. We have an open door policy. From childhood, I don't know how many Africans have been welcomed in our home or welcomed by our neighbors. And you know, this is a deliberate policy by government. And what therefore we do is build friendships, lasting friendships. Whoever is facing a challenge in their country is free to come in. They are free to assimilate, to even open a business. So this is a good thing. Africans feel safe in Uganda, and this is known around Africa. So my wish is that there could be more urgency on the part of governments, because for us in business, losing time is losing money. That there should, you know, we need to cut the red tape. If a colleague from South Africa would like to open up in Uganda, you know, we must really invest in easing business, doing of business, easing travel. And during the recent summit in South Africa, our chairman of the Private Sector Foundation raised to their excellencies the issue of visas. Ugandans were finding it rough to fly to South Africa, but we are happy that President Museveni and his counterpart in South Africa are Pan-African, and they have promised they are going to resolve this very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for sitting for this long and staying until 6 p.m. and being attentive and raising all these questions. Some of them were not questions, they were really comments, recommendations, and we take very serious note of them because they are all aiming at making tourism a better investment. I think I had like only 2 which were directed at me specifically. One by, I think, Mr. Mukundane, about the data capture. I think that was a very good observation, and it is something that we have been grappling with as government And before I forget, maybe I should inform this gathering that Dr. Manyara here through UNECA has helped us to build our first ever tourism satellite account for Uganda, using 2019 as our base year. I think you should give him a clap. And that is the kind of information that we are really targeting. So the issue we had was that at our entry points, we were using a system that had been developed specifically for security, especially, you remember, after the 9/11. So it was an American system that was given, I think, to most countries. So most of the information that was captured was really the information that's on your passport. And then you remember at one time we had those cards, which were also not capturing enough information. So now, working with immigration, we have developed what is called the border management system, which is going to be used not only at the airport, but at all entry and exit points, where we capture the kind of information that you're talking about. And reason for visit is one of the key elements that we want to capture. And that is one of the key features of the satellite account. Because if you can't capture that, then it's very difficult even for you to plan and to develop policies, because we have some information, like you said, but it was not, like disaggregated to that level. Somebody comes in and you're not asked exactly what you're coming for. Like you said, some people are coming for sports, others for health. So that is information that we are now capturing. I haven't, I don't know those who have been through the airport recently, whether coming in, do you get anybody asking you for that information? No? Well, I'm being told that sometimes, but sometimes not. So I think we are not yet being consistent with capturing that information, but we really want to do that. I think the other one was raised by Mr. Liazi about culture and sports and other. Why are we not investing enough? Well, I think, like Sarah was saying, it is, we are building, we are learning. So I think what most African countries were doing, and this is not only about Uganda, we tended to, our tourism was really skewed to nature-based tourism, because we had this wildlife, we had this ecosystem that most of the international travelers were interested in. But along the way, we have realized, and this is what, again, Dr. Manyara was saying, there are no gorillas in France, but they have more tourists than the whole of Africa. I don't know how many millions just visit it's called Eiffel Tower. Just that. So we have also, I think, started investing. Just to give an example, at the ministry, in the last few years, we have documented over 650 cultural sites. So we are only really limited by the resources. We want to be able to develop these sites. But I think originally, it's just a historic thing that we've been skewed to the nature-based tourism. But now we have realized that what makes us more unique is our culture, is our people. And so I think as government, we are really now refocusing our efforts in that line. Thank you very much once again.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was hoping you'd speak last, Madam Pierce. But nonetheless, so let me start with the issue of the visa, what can be done about the visa. I think Madam Sarah has already addressed that. I think some of these issues are more pressing to the private sector, so you should join in associations and lobby the public sector to make certain policy changes, isn't it? Like now the example you've given about South Africa and Uganda discussing the issue of the visas. I think this already has taken place in Kenya, because Kenyans now don't need visas to go to South Africa, but that was driven mainly by the private sector. So once you do that, you're able to press upon the public sector to make appropriate policy changes. The issue of small carriers. I think unfortunately in Africa, and this is why the space needs to be opened, most of the African carriers are national carriers, so they're owned by the public sector. But we need to allow the space for the private sector to get involved. I think the private sector is more competitive. And I think maybe the example of Europe, we have the EasyJets, the Ryanairs that have really transformed travel in the European continent, the low-cost carriers. We need to see a lot of those in the African continent. Which brings me down to the issue that was raised about SATAM. And I'm talking from experience here. The issue of taxes, yes, has been an issue, but now the issue is beyond taxes. We have member states pleading with African carriers, some of the, especially when it's only a single carrier that is accessing your country, pleading with them to lower the prices. So it's not about taxes anymore. So this is just something that we also need to address. Having said that, as a parting shot, maybe just to say that for as long as travel outside the African continent is cheaper, I think someone said that it's cheaper for you to take a holiday in Dubai than to do it in Africa. So what are we talking about here? We have to change that. It's cheaper for me to go to Europe than to go to Djibouti. It doesn't make sense. Where will I go on holiday? I'll go to Europe, you know? So we have to address that thing critically. And having said that, as we look into the tapping into the African market, we need to have appropriate products for the African market. I don't know what Uganda can sell to the Rwandans, because you both have gorillas, you know, or Kenyans to Tanzanians, because they both have, in fact, they even share the Mara and the Serengeti. So you see where I'm going with this. So we really need to rethink on what type of products can appeal to the African market. We need to change that. And having said that, I think as we are tapping into the African market, we also need to encourage our leaders, ministers, presidents. Where do they go on holiday? We need to see them enjoying the African continent. You know, with those few remarks, thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Manyara, you don't know social integration. We sell a lot to Rwanda in that regard. I want to thank you all for those beautiful comments and enlightenment that you've given us in regard to this session. At this point, I would like to invite the CEO of Uganda Tourism Board, who have been our beautiful hosts and conveners of this engagement, to come and give her parting shots, and also, yeah, she may have a few secrets for us as well in that regard. Madam Lily Ajarova, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Director Liazi. Good evening, everyone. Oh my God, the energy is so low. Good evening. I see the hosted buyers in the house. Okay, we need to get, Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much, our panelists, the PS. Thank you so much for your leadership. We are getting all the credits as UTB, but it comes from the higher leadership. So we really appreciate, and for you to take time to be on the panel as well. Thank you. And to all of you, in the interest of time, the hosted buyers and everyone else in the room who has the invitation to go to the cultural center in Ndere this evening, the buses are waiting. So because of that, I will just make it short. Allow me just say thank you to our panelists with just a small token of appreciation. And maybe if I could ask that we step down so that we can also have a group photo for all of you, with all of you together. Huh? Huh? And as they come down, Be reminded that we still have more seminar sessions tomorrow in the same room. We are going to be discussing investments, emerging issues, and all that. So please do come back to the same room. And once again, thank you so much for attending this session. Thank you for attending Poate 2023. Have a very lovely evening.
The photographer is still shooting. One more. Thank you all, members. We request you to go to the buses.
Every waking day is a reminder just how beautiful this, our land, truly is. The kind of beauty that you can only find here. In the lush green all around us and the wondrous sights within. It's what you feel in the gentle caress of tropical wind from the mountaintops. And the glow in your heart from a warm neighborly invite. It's in the distinct aroma of our cooking to the taste of food that takes you on a journey. In the sound of homecoming and the sound of Mother Earth. In the magnificence we find on our travels and the exciting moments we experience. Ours is the kind of beauty that comes in all things big and small. All we have to do is awaken our senses and truly enjoy what's uniquely ours. Explore Uganda, the Pearl of Africa.
Welcome to one of Africa's highest, most remote and unknown mountain ranges located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. The Rwenzori Mountains, also known as the Mountains of the Moon, are stretched over 120 kilometers long and 61 kilometers wide. Come and experience Africa's most beautiful alpine area. With every hour and every altitude gain, the landscapes, colors and views are ever-changing. This UNESCO-protected national park contains unique biodiversity and breathtaking sceneries such as the bamboo zones, mossy heather zone, numerous waterfalls, tropical rainforest, mountain lakes and eternal snow. Culminating at an altitude of 5,109 meters, the Margarita Peak is the highest point in Uganda and the third highest peak of the whole African continent after Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. This mystical and demanding mountain range is located on the foothills of Queen Elizabeth National Park, one of Africa's most popular game drives, and a few hundred kilometers from the Bwindi impenetrable forest that inhabits the endangered silverback mountain gorillas. Rwenzori Mountains offers trails for all levels of hikers, which range from 1-day to 10-day trips. The shorter trips are not as physically demanding and still showcase the amazing beauty in the art of nature, including rare vegetation, rivers, and numerous waterfalls. This unique biosphere is a true gem that needs to be preserved not only for the many endemic species it contains, but also for the local community which directly benefits and lives from the mountain's gifts. Be ready for the ultimate trekking experience. Come and discover Rwenzori, the Mountains of the Moon located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Welcome to one of Africa's highest, most remote and unknown mountain ranges located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. The Rwenzori Mountains, also known as the Mountains of the Moon, are stretched over 120 kilometers long and 61 kilometers wide. Come and experience Africa's most beautiful alpine area. With every hour and every altitude gain, the landscapes, colors and views are ever-changing. This UNESCO-protected national park contains unique biodiversity and breathtaking sceneries such as the bamboo zones, mossy heather zone, numerous waterfalls, tropical rainforest, mountain lakes, and eternal snow. Culminating at an altitude of 5,109 meters, the Margarita Peak is the highest point in Uganda and the third highest peak of the whole African continent after Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya. This mystical and demanding mountain range is located on the foothills of Queen Elizabeth National Park, one of Africa's most popular game drives, and a few hundred kilometers from the Bwindi impenetrable forest that inhabits the endangered silverback mountain gorillas. Rwenzori Mountains offers trails for all levels of hikers, which range from 1-day to 10-day trips. The shorter trips are not as physically demanding and still showcase the amazing beauty in the art of nature, including rare vegetation, rivers, and numerous waterfalls. This unique biosphere is a true gem that needs to be preserved not only for the many endemic species it contains, but also for the local community which directly benefits and lives from the mountain's gifts. Be ready for the ultimate trekking experience. Come and discover Rwenzori, the mountains of the moon located in Uganda, the Pearl of Africa.